Hello and welcome to the sixth episode of the Strength Coach Roundtable, hosted here on Row Perfect UK. Today, Blake Gourley, Joe Deleo, and I are going to be digging in to the deadlift. This is an excellent lift that we're all a big fan of, so we're just going to talk about it today. If you have questions, you can hit us up on social media. Otherwise, we're going to go through an overview of the deadlift, why it's beneficial to rowing, a good progression to learn it, variations that we use in training, and how to actually train it as far as sets and reps and periodization for in-season and off-season training. I'm excited to get into this. Blake, you want to bring us up to speed first on anything you've been up to over the last few weeks?
Sure. Yeah, I'm just finishing up my master's right now, so that's been the main focus. About to go into champs with my team, and then from there, summer programs and just traveling around for continuing education.
Good deal. Joe?
Hey guys, great catching up with you. On my end, just working on some projects kind of in the background and continuing to do some podcast interviews. Got an upcoming rowing camp in Avis, Portugal in June, which will be pretty cool. So looking forward to kicking that off. It's the inaugural camp, so first time we're doing it.
I don't know if this will put you in the hot seat or in trouble with anyone, but who's been your favorite podcast guest in the last 6 weeks since we've done an episode?
Oh, wow. That's tough. Yeah, I've had some since the last one.
It could be a favorite too. It doesn't have to be the favorite.
In the last 6 weeks. I really like the one I did with Steve Cotter. He's a kettlebell expert, martial artist, been coaching and training for 15 to 20 years, works with professional athletes and stuff. Just very, very knowledgeable, very experienced. Really, we spent a lot of time talking about mindset and approach to training and longevity and stuff. So it was really good perspective.
Cool. I have a hard time staying on top of podcasts, but I've got a couple of yours queued up for my next couple long road trips, including in next weekend. I will be at the West Coast Invitational, or WIRA Regatta. So if any of our listeners are going to be there, make sure you hit me up on social media, as I would love to meet you. Blake, are you still thinking about coming up for that?
Yeah, I'm planning on it if I can find the time. I just need to get on top of my master's.
Sweet. Cool. Yeah, I know that game. Blake is finishing his master's. I am finishing up my first year of my master's, and that has been busy. What with continuing to coach rowing, and also we're in the last few regular season games of my high school lacrosse team. Yeah. So let's get into the deadlift. Who wants to give us just a quick overview of the lift, and one reason do you think it's a beneficial lift for rowing? Right, we'll be diplomatic about that. Joe, why don't you go ahead?
Actually, I was going to say you take the background info on it, Will, because you use the barbell probably more than anybody here.
All right, well, that's a good point, actually. That the deadlift itself can mean a bunch of different things. At its core, I think, is the barbell deadlift, and that is just the simple act of taking a bar from the floor to hip height. So I think it's awesome for rowing because it essentially very closely simulates the rowing stroke. You have a little bit less compression in the deadlift than you do in the rowing stroke, but the basic principles are the same as far as moving a weight, arms straight, torso tight, and driving with the legs to transmit that power from the floor through your body to the barbell. I am a big fan of the barbell lift, but with a lot of the help of actually you guys over the last year and a bit, I've been experimenting with a couple different variations too. So I'm looking forward to talking more about that.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that was great. I think the only thing I'd add to that is, traditionally the deadlift is using the sport of powerlifting, one of the three. So included in that's the bench press and the back squat. And it is a, 1 rep max attempt. So that's probably one of the biggest differences between the lift and, the sport of rowing. It's a power endurance event versus a 1 rep max attempt. But like you pointed out, tons of carryover in terms of the biomechanics and force transfer and what we're doing in the rowing stroke.
And if you want to come play with us in strongman, I actually like deadlifting for strongman a ton more because we get to do stuff like deadlift cars, deadlift frames, deadlift for reps. We'll do touch and go. We'll do dead stop. Strongman really embraces the variation of deadlifting.
That's awesome, man. Very cool. Very cool.
I might post a couple pictures in the recap link just to show people what they're missing and or can look forward to once they're done with rowing. All right, Blake.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off of all that, I just think it puts them in the position that I primarily want most of my rowers. I prefer a much more hip dominant stroke as opposed to kind of more of a squat, although the stroke's kind of a combination of the two. I would prefer that my athletes, feel their glutes and hamstrings quite a bit more than the quads, and just really be able to find the power from their back end.
And are you talking about in the boat or on the bar in that case, where you talk about a more quad dominant stroke or a more hip dominant stroke?
I'm talking about in the boat. And I feel like the deadlift teaches that position. I think that works well for the technique that I'm trying to get to transfer from land to water.
So a more hip dominant stroke, you're looking at things like less compression, less heel lift at the catch. Let's walk us through what a more hip dominant stroke looks like compared to a more quad dominant stroke in the boat.
Basically like more body angle forward, flatter spine, less round in the back, being able to really kind of hang from the lats and then swing open hard from the hips, as opposed to kind of more like a squat dominant, which I feel like is a little bit more traditional.
Gotcha. Cool. I think in rowing, one of the things I was actually talking about with my guys just last week is that we are using a very imprecise language to define very precise movement, and that there's always going to be, whether it's through jargon or whether it's just through the inadequacy of language to describe physical movement, always some room for interpretation on what hip dominant versus quad dominant. So we'll try, especially since this is an audio presentation, to be clear about when we talk about terms like that. Any other reasons more that you guys think it's beneficial for rowing? Anything else you want to hit, Joe?
Yeah, a couple more to just make sure that we're driving home. So besides the emphasis on the hip hinge, use of the posterior chain, it's an excellent lift to slow things down, hence deadlift, bringing the bar off the floor from a dead stop, to teach the athlete body awareness, how to root into the floor, develop force transfer by pushing down into the floor, bracing, creating stiffness through the torso, and then transferring that into the bar. So a lot of the same things that we're trying to do with the feet off the foot stretcher, and then the hands around the oar handle.
Let me add in one thing that we're trying to do with the hands too, is that in a deadlift, there's a little bit of space, just a couple millimeters in between the sleeve of the barbell and the hole of the plate, where the plate slides over the barbell. And good deadlifters, and I might have to do a video about this too for the recap if one of you doesn't have it already, but when they start a deadlift, it's called taking the slack out of the bar, whereas you drop your hips down into the deadlift position, you pull up with your hands just a little bit, not too much to get the biceps into it, but basically just like exactly the motion at the catch of just getting the blade in the water and then applying pressure with the hips. And if someone doesn't do that, what you'll hear when they deadlift is a hard, like clicking noise as the collar slams into the plates, which is wasting force. So that's another great thing that I've loved to tie in when teaching athletes suspension in the boat and taking the slack out of the bar in the deadlift. That's another. I mean, it was a great point that you made about connecting pressure through the feet, but tying it into the hands as well.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. I actually use the exact same line that you said. I said, take the click out, make sure that you're connected before you start driving. And that's one of the best things about, all the lifts that we actually use besides the deadlift, is that it's just another coaching opportunity, and you'll see the same issues that they have on the water present themselves in the lift.
Yeah, and it's awesome because it's not an abstract thing. Suspension when the boat's going quickly, whatever. It's a little bit hard for athletes to get the grasp of sometimes. But on the deadlift, you've got take the click out of the bar. You've got auditory feedback for something that we don't usually have in rowing. So I think that's a great thing to highlight attention to for athletes.
Yeah, and one other thing that you just reminded me both of is in addition to taking the slack out of the bar, the click, really posting up from the bar. So what I mean by that is, a common thing that we see in the rowing stroke is we'll see an athlete, their shoulders will start creeping up towards their ears. So we really want them to post up off the bar, meaning they're anti-shrugging, they're using the lat and packing the shoulder down, retracting the shoulders. And so they've got that nice connection. The lat is bringing that connection to the opposite glute. So now we have this total body connection from the hands gripping the bar into the lat, into the glutes, all the way down the hamstring, into the feet, into the floor.
Yeah, and actually a little bit of a personal story there for me. So I've been training for strongman and powerlifting for 4 years or so now. And I stalled out really hard on the deadlift. I think with the benefit of all my rowing training and stuff, my back was naturally pretty strong. And so I was able to jump pretty quickly up in the mid 400s. But I stalled out at 485, which is just shy of 5 plates, for fully 2 years. And what ended up fixing it for me was basically just going back to ground zero and relaying all of my deadlift training with that depressed scapula position, or the shoulders back and down. One of the cues I'll use here is shoulders in the back pocket. And the funny thing for me is that that's how I teach all of my athletes to deadlift, is with that proud chest, not too much extension at the thoracic spine. You don't want to be, really super arched, but that neutral spine with the shoulders in the back pocket. That's how I teach my athletes to deadlift. And yet that was not how I was deadlifting. So as soon as I went back and basically just committed to redoing all of my training with that, January-ish finally hit a pretty easy 495 with room to spare. I haven't taken the deadlift max since then with everything else going on, but I'm excited to here once the season wraps up. A little bit of a humble brag there too.
Very nice, man. Congrats.
Thanks. It was a long road, so I was pretty happy about it, but also frustrated with just banging my head into a wall for stuff that it was super frustrating. I already knew it. I just wasn't doing it myself.
Nice. Yeah. Sometimes we need our own coaches, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I like teaching, athletes how to feel the hang, right? And what you guys just described that's what I would describe, like feel the hang from the lats. A lot of times if you talk to your athletes, especially as they're learning, and actually even some of the college kids I've talked to, when they suspend and really hang on the oar, the first place they feel is their back. And that's a bad thing. That's something we want to really avoid. So
You mean the lower back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we can find a way on land to teach them how to hang from the lats and find the tension there, that's going to go a long way keeping them safe and increasing their performance.
And then the deadlift too provides a very real simulation for shooting the slide too. That was part of my problem as well, is that I wasn't generating enough torso tightness and keeping my lats and shoulders packed down. So as soon as I would apply pressure to the feet, my hips would shoot up, my back would round, and then I would push the bar out in front of me, which would make it very, very difficult to lock out weights. And there's nothing more frustrating than missing a deadlift at like the mid thigh. You essentially have like 3 more inches just to lock out. But because I wasn't generating enough torso tightness, keeping my chest up through the lift, I was basically doing the exact same thing as you see in the rowing stroke when you get the oar in the water, jam down with the feet, and then because you don't have enough torso tightness, you shoot your slide.
Yeah, that's a great point, Will. Just re-emphasizing again the importance of proximal stability for distal athleticism there, and being able to transfer force through the trunk.
You want to explain a little bit about what those terms mean for our audience, because that's a really good thing with some sciencey jargon into it, is proximal stability for distal athleticism, right?
Yeah. So, if anybody's interested in reading more about it, definitely check out Ultimate Back Fitness and Performance by Dr. Stuart McGill. He goes into it in depth in that book. And that one's specifically geared towards athletes and coaches. But in a nutshell, what you're talking about is the area of the body, the torso, the trunk. So everything from the shoulders, between the hips, that area is designed, and they found this out through the laboratory testing and stuff, is to prevent motion. So by stiffening, and by stiffening, we're not thinking, Frankenstein walking, super stiff. We're talking about stiffening or tensing the musculature. We're able to actually generate more force, power, and velocity at the shoulders and hips, right? So we're talking about generating more force through the legs, and then that whip fulcruming through the torso, and then adding in the arms in the second half of the rowing stroke. So to do that, we need to kind of reflexively stabilize through the trunk during the drive, so we're able to generate and tap into that elastic energy from the body.
Nice, very good. So if you've got an athlete, and let's kind of go through a couple different athletes, or maybe you use the same model for everybody. But if you've got high school novice, college novice, master athlete, what would be your progression scheme for one of those, or if you use the same one for all of those? Joe, you want to start?
Sure. So first thing is just, we got to establish kind of if they can even, feet together, can they touch their toes? So that's going to help guide us pretty quickly. And this is, quick and dirty assessment if we haven't taken them through like an FMS screen beforehand. But if they can't touch their toes, then they shouldn't be picking up a kettlebell or bar.
And is that
off the floor?
Back rounded, back totally flat? What are your parameters on touching the toes?
So you should have a feet together, posterior weight shift, so they're shifting into the hip, and then hands stacked, touching one another, and hinging through the hip, touching the toes. So the back should be flat.
So okay, so really the full hip hinge motion all the way down to the floor.
Correct. Yep. So from there, once we've established that, we know where they can start. So if they can't touch their toes, that's fine. Most people will achieve it in, a couple training sessions. So I usually use a step aerobics box, and start them with, a kettlebell, and they're doing a sumo deadlift, and they're usually, when they place their feet outside of that step aerobics box, they'll be shoulder width. But before that, we're adding load, of course, we're patterning it. So I use a dowel rod, 3 points of contact, head, shoulder blades, right at the buttocks, and then learning the hip hinge pattern. And then from there, I take that dowel rod away and do a McGill shortstop drill. So they use they chop into the hip crease, push their hips back, posterior weight shift, slide the hands down the thighs right above the knee, gently push the knees out. So making sure the knees are tracking the toes. And then now we're into that hip hinge position.
Gotcha. And for our audience, there will be videos of all of this in the recap, because I know, Joe, you and I both have that dowel rod 3 points of contact video on both of our YouTube channels. That's a big one that I'm a fan of too.
Yep. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So just moving from the dowel rod to, kind of no tools assistance. I think it's really important the athlete has the ability to get into that position on their own, because that demonstrates they have the awareness and control to do that. And then you start, loading them. And then from there, depending on what the ability, once they get to touch their toes, then you can start doing stuff like the barbell. But I'll let you guys take it from there.
Yeah, interesting that you brought that up, actually, with the not relying on the tools for feedback. That was a big part of my graduate motor learning class fall quarter that I wrote a bunch about for my email list, was on not relying on tools too much, not relying on feedback too much, and really forcing the athlete to process their own feedback, whether that's through video afterwards, or if you can use a mirror without having to crane your head into an awkward position, but forcing the athlete to feel, am I in the right position, and how do I get into the right position, rather than relying on a tool or a guide or constant feedback from a coach. Blake, what do you want to add?
Yeah, I start similar ways, mostly with the dowel hip hinge. Then I'll progress to kettlebell deadlifts. If I need to elevate it, I will. If I don't, I won't. After they really mastered the kettlebell, we'll move on to trap bar. And then I'll spend most of my time on trap bar. I usually don't progress past trap bar. But when we get into like different phases, I'll change the way I use it in terms of like speed and dropping and whatnot.
And we'll talk about all that in the periodization and sets and reps part of this. For the audience, the trap bar is often referred to as the hex bar. And again, video or picture of this in the recap. But basically, the athlete stands in the device and then lifts from side handles beside them. And Blake, I know you've got an article on your website about how much you like the trap bar. Do you want to sum up what the difference is there and what the pros and cons are as you see it?
Yeah, I think especially for taller athletes, it puts them in a better position, and it takes off shear load. And I feel like we get plenty of shear load in the boat already, and anywhere we can minimize that, I will. So that's what I do with the trap bar. I also feel like it's easier for a lot of people to learn, and since most rowers, their main sport's not weightlifting, I'd rather just them be able to learn very quickly and progress from there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That ultimately the only reason we're using the deadlift is to make them better rowers, not to, you don't get any extra points in regattas or time adjustment on your 2K score for having a bigger deadlift. It's all about just how much you can transfer that strength to the boat. So I think we've all got a couple different variations that we like to use to enhance that carryover. One thing that I'll add for my deadlift progression, I would say I'm a little bit less hard line than Joe is as far as expecting athletes to get all the way down to the floor. I do like to teach the hip hinge first. And I do like to use that dowel drill to train the hip hinge with the 3 points of contact, head, mid back, and butt, because that really forces the athlete to not round over at the spine at any points during the lift. Where I usually start from there, once they can get the basic motion down of the hip hinge, is with a Romanian deadlift. Which does not start from the floor, so it really shouldn't even be called a deadlift. But basically, the athlete starts at the top of the lift and then works their way down. So they basically be doing exactly the hip hinge motion with the bar starting at the lockout, and then we'll move them down progressively. The other thing that I'll do sometimes is I'll go from the bottom up. So I'll start it from the bottom of the lift in the true deadlift position off the floor, and then have the athlete just go through essentially like the reverse pictorial, if you're going to use the rowing term, where we'll do just legs only, so no opening of the torso. Then we'll do legs and half of the lockout basically, and then back down, and then legs, half the lockout, and then the full lockout to finish the lift standing straight up. And I've got a video for that on my YouTube that I will link in the recap. But I actually took that from the track and field internship that I did, is teaching the Olympic lifts either from the top down or from the bottom up. That's a big part of the USA weightlifting curriculum is top down.
Yeah, I like that. That's pretty. That's a great way to kind of progress it, because you're kind of teaching from both ends, and then usually they kind of meet in the middle somewhere in terms of learning. The athlete puts it together, so that's a great way to teach it and have the athlete learn. So that's pretty cool. I'll be playing around, experimenting, adding that in as well.
Yeah, and what they talked about in the USA weightlifting clinic is that it's hard to teach from the bottom up because the athletes don't necessarily have a clear idea of where they're going. That starting from the top down provides, okay, here's the end point. So now I have to get from, point D to point E basically, instead of A to B, but not knowing where E is, if that makes sense. So teaching from the top down is like, okay, here's lockout. Here's what it feels like to be in a strong position just shy of the lockout. Now you can move it further down with them having a clear idea of it each way.
Yeah, I really like that. I feel like most of the time, like if they understand the beginning and if they understand the end, they're gonna find the middle ground. So I feel like that'd be really beneficial.
And you didn't think you were going to get philosophy in here today with your roundtable.
No, but that's good. I like adding that in. There's one other thing I forgot to mention, and I actually think this is super critical. So before I load the athlete, I'd like to make sure that they know and have learned how to brace. So I'll have them take their index and middle finger on both hands, find their navel, move laterally to both sides, and to kind of gently just press in to their abdomen. And then I ask them to create a muscular contraction, and then they're pushing their fingers out. And then I have them start thinking about creating that muscular contraction, creating that stiffness in the torso that we talked about earlier, proximal stability, 360 degrees around. So not just the front, not just the sides or the back, 360 degrees around the body. And now we're really creating that stiffness to buttress the spine before we take a very heavy load off of the floor.
So I saw that you got into a vehement argument on the Masters Rowing International Facebook group, which if you haven't joined that, that's Row Perfect and Marlene Royal together running a Facebook group that has a lot of really good discussion from a lot of great coaches and Masters rowers on there. But Joe, do you want to quickly summarize the difference between that 360-degree brace and the kind of classic abs up and in brace? And again, this is hard to say in words, so we'll try to put diagrams and stuff like that in the recap too.
Yeah, and you know, I don't mind discussing this because this is something that, and I'll explain why. But I think what you're referring to, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you say the abs up, you're talking about pulling the belly button into the spine. That was the language. Yeah. So
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Here's the reason that I'm pretty vehement and steadfast on this point. So in February, I had the opportunity to go down to Florida for 3 days and attend Dr. McGill's seminar. And he spent probably 30 minutes talking about how the research has shown, and part of the idea of pulling the navel or the belly button to the spine was to activate the transverse abdominis. Well, they did EMG muscle testing in the lab, and they found that that actually is not creating more muscle activity. It's actually taking it away. So you might get the transverse abdominis maybe a little bit, but you're shutting down the obliques and the supporting and periphery muscles around the spine. So it's a cue that is actually taking away athleticism. And he's pretty clear about that in Ultimate Back Fitness and Performance. So if we're going to pick up a very heavy bar off the floor, or being at the catch at the rowing stroke, you're putting an athlete in a position where they're actually, one, not going to be able to transfer force from the foot plate through their torso to the oar handle and to the blade, and then two, they're not buttressing their spine under posture, motion, or load. So that's part of the huge reason that I was so steadfast about that argument, because that's the research, the evidence has been validated. And it's just, in my opinion, from what I learned that weekend, it's not practical. It's not going to lead to good performance. And I think it could actually end up hurting some athletes in the long run.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And actually, interestingly, some of that McGill research comes out of his research article that he did on strongman athletes, right? Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah. I mean, he did a lot of testing with the strongmen, and specifically on integrating carries, farmer's carry and suitcase carry. So if anybody's not familiar, farmer's carry, you have either very heavy dumbbell or barbell or kettlebell in both hands, and suitcase carry is unilateral. And what they found is that the suitcase carry actually generated way higher EMG muscle activity in the opposite quadratus lumborum. And so that muscle is really helping to stabilize the lumbopelvic hip complex. So that's super, super crucial.
Yeah, and I will say too that from the strongman perspective, you can load the actual farmer's walk implements far heavier than you can with the barbell or a dumbbell or kettlebells, just because of the nature of the implement. And some of the research that came up in that McGill article was from actual like contest weights that we'll do in strongman, which is usually for my weight class in the 175 or the 200s, somewhere around 200 to 250 pounds per hand. So you're talking about 400 or 500 pounds total, which is just much more just because of the way that the weight works than you can load on a kettlebell or a dumbbell.
And they're using it's the super yoke, right?
Yeah. And so the super yoke goes across your back, like you would carry, a yoke, like, buckets of water or whatever draped off of it. And then, I mean, the World's Strongest Man contest is happening here in a couple weeks, and those guys will be doing yokes well over 1,000 pounds. It's really quite nuts, the level of torso stability that these guys have to generate just to be able to transfer weight and not just get crushed under it.
I think to give people a good visual of the different types of bracing, I think if you picture like a really strong person, so maybe a strongman competitor, and you look at their belly, like they almost look like they're kind of fat, but it's like it's all muscle, and it kind of looks like a turtle shell, and it's a giant barrel, and that's the kind of tension we're trying to create. We're not trying to suck up and in and create some kind of artificial tension. Like we're trying to use all of our muscles around our spine to support and help us transfer the force.
And to be clear, that's a good visualization, but it's definitely not saying that if you do the 360-degree brace, you will develop the body shape of a strongman. We're also not advocating for super heavy farmer's walks or yoke walks for rowers. I'm assuming both of you are on the same page on that.
Yeah, it's all based on the individual. That might be applicable to the athlete. It all depends where they are in terms of their training continuum and stuff. You have to earn the right to go very heavy. I mean, case in point, how many years has it taken you to build up to 495 pounds on a deadlift?
Well, longer than it should have, but but suffice to say, yes, somewhere in the 4 or 5 year range. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I know what you mean. I'm just injecting a bit of my own hindsight frustration there.
No, it's all good. But yeah, that's super important. I mean, and to Blake's point too, in terms of the actual appearance of like a power lifter, they have almost that turtle shape. I mean, that's exactly what McGill is talking about, that they've spent years developing that type of stiffness in their body so that they can lift super heavy weights. Now, these are individuals that are, squatting, close to 1,000 pounds or approaching. So the only way to do that is to develop tremendous stiffness through the torso to move that bar and not have your spine buckle. That is not where a rower needs to head, because they need to have some kind of elastic qualities to the body to really tap into generating power across the rowing stroke. You don't want to be that stiff. These are guys that, some of them, they're lifting that heavy, they're not going to be able to bend over to even get to their shoes.
Well, and you're also only doing it for, one rep or one run on an implement at a time. You're certainly not maintaining that level of bracing across 2,000 meters.
Totally.
So to bring this back to the deadlift there, because that was a good discussion on torso stiffness, and I think it's really important to learn what those different types of bracings are and to try to use the more effective one in your own training. We talked a little bit about different variations that we use, as far as me using a lot of the Romania deadlift, Blake using the trap bar. One thing that I'll mention too is that the little bit of the history of the deadlift is that a 45-pound plate is considered the standard starting height for a deadlift. So if you put two 45-pound plates on the bar, that puts the bar as a little over 8.5 inches off the ground. the reason for that is that back in the day when the International Olympic Committee was running things for the Olympic lifts, the snatch and the clean, um, 8.75 inches was considered the safe height to not crush a lifter's skull if someone fell backwards with the bar from a snatch or a clean position. That's the only reason that that's the standard height of a 45-pound plate. I think so. Whether you're 5 feet tall or whether you're Blake, how tall are you? Like 6'9" or something?
6'7".
Okay, close enough. So whether you're me at 5'8" or Blake at 6'7", we're both deadlifting from the same height off the ground. So that's one thing that I bring up a lot for rowing is the utility of the block pole or the rack pole, which elevates the bar off the ground more. So you can either set that at a consistent height. So you could say, okay, all of my rowers, you're all going to do this from this point on your shins. You can figure that out. I usually use a little bit more flexible approach. And I'll just kind of just have standard block heights. And as long as we get the bar somewhere more like 13, 14, maybe even 18 inches off the ground sometimes, depending on how tall the rower is, that could put everybody in a much more, I don't know about fair, but just biomechanically fair point so that everybody's basically lifting from the same relative height. It's really hard for rowers. I find a lot of times really hard for rowers who are as tall as Blake. And we've got some of the guys on our team are 6'6", 6'7", to teach them to get into a good position, a safe position to lift from that standard height off the floor. So not only using the Romanian deadlift as a way to train it from the hip height, but also once we go to actual deadlifting, sometimes I'll just have those guys, okay, you're pulling off of blocks, period, until we tell you otherwise, just because that's a safer position for them to pull from.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you said that because there is absolutely no downside to pulling off of blocks. Not only are you putting the athlete in a safer position, but there's nothing to say that that's going to diminish the return on doing a lift that way. And I think that's a really important point for us to make because somehow sometimes if somebody isn't pulling from the floor, they feel like they're not maintaining the integrity of the lift, and that's just nonsense. You have to modify the lift at hand to the athlete, not the other way around.
Right. And that's not to say that you can't create a good position from the floor. Some of the best deadlifters in the strongman scene are, Brian Shaw or Halfthor Bjornsson. Any of those guys are all 6'7", 6'8" in that range. Now they also weigh 400 to 450 pounds. But they can get into a good position off the floor because they have to for their sport. Once you're done rowing, and then if you want to compete in powerlifting, obviously you'll need to learn how to pull off the floor. But for the time being, if you're deadlifting with the purpose of becoming a better rower, put the bar at whatever height you need to in order to get the most carryover out of the exercise. Now, caveat there is to stay off the internet, because if you go posting videos of yourself on the internet, people will vilify you for it. So just be confident knowing that you and your coach are doing the right thing there.
Yeah, totally. And the only other thing I'd throw in just in regards to variations, I do like to progress at some point to doing some single leg deadlift work, whether that's with a pair of dumbbells or a pair of kettlebells, and then eventually going into like a contralateral progression, because that really forces the athlete to root down through that single leg stance, but they're using the opposite hand, the grip, the shoulder, the lat. So they're developing a lot of that cross body connection that they would get in a sweep rowing shell.
So contralateral, that's the weight in one hand and then your other foot on the ground. So if you'd have the weight in your right hand and your stance on your left foot.
Yes, thank you for making that clear. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm trying to work through it myself, so I'm sympathetic to the audience as well. Blake, are there any other variations that you use, or do you pretty much stick to trap bar and some of the other ones you mentioned?
Yeah, kettlebell, trap bar, and SLDLs as well, as Joe just mentioned.
SLDL, straight leg deadlift?
Sorry, single leg deadlift.
Single leg deadlift.
Just what Joe described, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, let's not even start with acronyms. So then I'll just sum up briefly my approach to training it in season versus off season. Is I use a fairly high variety in the off season. So I follow the block periodization system for most of my programming with my rowers, and that's what I've written the book off of as well. Rowing Stronger is on the block periodization system, where you use, let's say we've got a spring 2K rower, so guys rowing right now in the summer season will be the highest variety. So there we'll use the Romanian deadlift, the block pull, the floor deadlift, the trap bar if they've got access to it. Really build a wide base of strength, and then basically it gets a little bit more specific with each season. So then to this point in the spring, they're basically just doing RDLs at this point. Blake, I love that you mentioned reducing shear forces, which is the force on the spine, basically from the front of the spine to the back of the spine, instead of compression forces, which is top down. Minimizing that, I think, is really big, especially at this point in the season, where what matters is the force that they're developing and how well that they're able to row. So I find that guys generally are a little bit less sore, a little bit less beat up from using the Romanian deadlift than they are from deadlifting off the floor week in and week out. That's something I've certainly discovered in my own training as well. So at this point of the season, we're really highly focused on the water. We're doing more, I guess, simple exercises in more predictable loading schemes, whereas in the summer, in the off season, then we'll build higher loading, lower loading, more reps, less reps, that kind of thing, to build a wider base.
Yeah, and what I do is I start with kettlebell, I go to trap bar, and then I'll spend most of the time on the trap bar, but I will start with isometrics. And what I mean by that is we just start in the bottom of the deadlift position, and we just create as much tension as we can. We tug up into the bar without lifting it. And we just hold that for 5 seconds, stand up, catch your breath, because you'll get a little lightheaded. And we do a few reps like that. So just learning how to create as much tension as you can before you even try to move.
Interesting.
So I'll start, that's how I start to teach it. And then I'll do like really slow pace, a little bit higher reps. And then I'll go into more of like a strength endurance, where it's, I'll go a little bit heavier on trap bar, and I'll pair it with a kettlebell deadlift. So say we'll do like 10 reps of the trap bar and then 10 reps of the kettlebell. Really just working on grooving that motion and building a little bit endurance. And then I'll go into like a strength phase. And most of the time in the strength phase, I'll drop the trap bar, so they won't actually be returning it to the floor. They'll just pick it up and drop it. I find that helps a lot with reducing soreness in season. And then I'll go into like a power phase, where I'll pair a little bit lighter trap bar, but like quick, aggressive, how fast can I explode up? And then I'll pair that with maybe like a kettlebell swing, or some kind of explosive action that's similar to the deadlift.
It's interesting to use the pairing of exercises there. That's not something I've played with much, and as well as the isometrics. Just to come back to those real quick, are you basically loading the bar with like 700 pounds on that, or do you have some sort of device that prevents the athlete from moving the bar from the floor?
Yeah, I'll usually just put enough weight that I know they can't lift it. So even if they don't listen to me, they can't go anywhere.
Gotcha. It's all about making things athlete proof. I'm a big fan of the power work too, particularly at this point in the season. It's basically just about maintaining strength and then pushing the athlete's power, force production. So that's been one of my changes over my last couple of years. Is I used to do a lot more kind of heavier deadlifting in that 80% and up range, and now I focus a lot more of our time in the 65 to 80% of their 1 rep max. So an athlete's 1 rep max is 100 pounds. This would be focusing like 5 sets of 3, 6 sets of 3 in like the 65 to 80 pound range, just to use easy numbers there.
Nice. That's a great progression. So after they've, like, the way I approach it, after they've learned the skill, like, so at the beginning, I'm just trying to have them pattern, the most pristine type of movement possible with the lift. So if they're learning it at the beginning and just kind of coding that motor engram, they're doing singles. But once we start really training it, usually whether it's with kettlebells or the barbell, 3 to 5 sets in the 3 to 5 rep range. And if they're going myself or somebody's going truly very heavy, singles or doubles. That would be with the barbell. And, a big part of that was coming out of that weekend with Dr. McGill. When we got to the section where he talked about performance enhancement with athletes and approaching the bar, you want to generate 100% neural drive. So you want to get a little bit angry. You want to, really think about visualization of being explosive and generating as much force, nerve force through the muscle and getting that bar to move very quickly and powerfully, off the floor. It shouldn't feel slow and heavy, even though it might appear that way. It should feel kind of explosive and fast.
That's a super important point with the power work, with the force production work, is that at 75 to 80% of one rep max, it might not necessarily look fast, but as long as the athlete is trying to move the bar quickly, then or the implement, whatever it is, then that's the most important thing is intended force.
Yeah, totally. And that's huge because, that neural drive, that is, what I've found when I've started to just have sessions where I'm doing singles, you're working on getting through some sticking points at certain points, and how that translates over into, what I found in the rowing stroke is that as you start to fatigue, you're building in that kind of tolerance, that neuromuscular control, where you're able to push through that. That you don't want to go there during training all the time. That's not the point, but that's why you're doing the singles, to just encode, perfect, pristine movement and have it be kind of on autopilot. So that's what you're doing, at race pace or at performance when you're lifting at the heavy singles.
That's a good point too, that we all talked about using lower reps compared to higher reps. Blake, you mentioned sets of 10. I'll use sets of 8 to 10 on the Romania deadlifts as well. But I feel like a lot of rowers hear strength endurance, or think about kind of the traditional way of strength training with really high reps, because, we do 200 strokes in a 2K, so we better do 4 sets of 50 on the deadlift, and that is a real injury risk, because you just can't maintain proper torso bracing, proper technique, whatever, for that amount of repetitions. It's also the weight that you're using is so little by that point, that you're not really getting the physiological adaptations as far as strength or building muscle or anything that we want. It's essentially just a test of, will your back break from this or not? So it sounded like when we do strength endurance, we're doing stuff more like 10 to 12 sets of 1 to 3 reps, with lower rest, rather than the opposite of that, which would be the conventional, 3 sets of 12. We're doing stuff more like 12 sets of 3. Is that what you guys do as well?
Yeah, and I think oftentimes coaches specifically want to make every single thing very, very specific to their sport. And I think you really want to approach strength training for rowing just to develop strength. And we're already developing the ability to do 200 strokes in a row on the water. We don't need to be being that specific on land.
There's an Ed McNeely quote that I love and use a lot as well, and that is that strength endurance without adequate strength is just getting better at being weak. The idea that if you can't produce a certain amount of force already, then you're just training endurance at very, very low intensities, which is not actually making you better at anything.
Yeah, rowing's a power endurance sport. So the strongest, most explosive, powerful athlete that's able to, maintain that over the course of the 2,000 meter race is going to get their bow ball across the line first.
Yeah. Look at Sam Locke if you need any further proof of that.
Right. And I would say if you want to get into the higher rep range, just start swinging the kettlebell. You can do sets of 10 to 20 or go for 30 seconds, and you're using a moderately to heavy weight. If you're going up to like a 48 kilogram bell or heavier, that's 106 pounds for anybody that doesn't know. And, or if you're doing even, a 32 kilogram, doing one arm swings, you're getting anti-rotation in there. You're working through the hip hinge. It's being very explosive. That's building off the deadlift. And now you're working in a lift that is very contrast or very parallel to the rowing stroke, in that you have tension, relaxation, drive, and recovery, right? So there's that pulsing kind of effect going on where you're turning it on and off, turning it on and off. Whereas with the deadlift, you're getting stiff, you're maintaining that stiffness all the way through the entire lift. So that's, to me, that's some of the major differences right there between those two things, and how we can take it into higher rep ranges safely.
Yeah, that's a great point. Blake, any final notes on the deadlift here before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you guys have found anything, but the one research article that I found, they found that the average weight of each stroke was 123 pounds. And obviously that's going to depend on the rig of your shell and the age of your shell and the size of people in your boat and all that. But let's just run with that number. Like if it actually weighs 123 pounds and you have to do 200 reps of it, like you better get pretty strong so that you have some kind of strength reserve to be able to handle that. If you can't lift 123 pounds on land, you're not going to do it well on water. Like you'll find a way, but you're not going to do it well, and you're probably going to get hurt, and you're probably not going to go very fast.
Well, even if you can do it well on water, it's still just looking at it from the point of which is the more effective way to develop endurance. Doing tons and tons of reps at 123 pounds, or making 123 pounds a small percentage of your max. That is, if your max is 135 pounds on the deadlift and you need to be able to move 125 pounds or whatever in the rowing stroke, it'll be much more effective if you can make your max somewhere in the 205 pound range, just using arbitrary numbers here. And then 125 pounds is a much lower percentage of the maximum force you're able to produce. Therefore, you're able to do more reps with it. Much more effective to do it that way than to train endurance from the bottom up.
Right, exactly. So if you look at the same study, they talk about strength reserve, and they actually show that that's exactly what you just described as strength reserve. So if you need 125 strokes, right, and if someone's 200 and if someone can deadlift 250 pounds and they need to apply 125, now they have a strength reserve of 125. And what they found in this study was that if you have a higher strength reserve, you have better rowing performance.
Nice. We will definitely link that in the recap. Joe, final notes on the deadlift?
No, I think we all did a great job tonight. I was really pumped to discuss this one with you guys. I think it's a great compliment to the rowing stroke. I think the only thing I'd emphasize is just, take your time, build into the lift slowly, make sure you're developing the fundamentals, learning the hip hinge pattern, the bracing, regardless of the tool that you're using. Make sure you're getting good quality coaching to reinforce all those aspects.
Yeah, we could do a good like one of those Rob Lowe cable commercials with me, though, is a video of me deadlifting from 3 years ago. And hi, I'm Will Ruth, and I don't know how to hip hinge. Don't be like this me. Be like this me instead, and actually learn how to hip hinge and lay that foundation first. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and wrap that up there. Thank you guys for your time and your thoughts on that. To our audience members, if you like the direction that we went with this podcast and would like to see more kind of specific lift related or specific training variable related stuff, please do let us know. We appreciate your feedback. And remember, as Icelandic strongman John Paul Sigmarsson said, there is no reason to be alive if you can't do the deadlift. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.